Good morning, everyone. I'm glad we're coming together today. It's really important work we're doing this morning, and I want to welcome everyone here to the House of BYRC. Before I begin, I'd like to first acknowledge the traditional territory that we're on here, and that is Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and their families that are around the Stolo Nations. And I also like to acknowledge the families that are present today and our ancestors of this land. And one of the important pieces we'll take care of before we start here with our special guest here today, I want to welcome Bruce Robinson to our morning here to open up with a prayer and song. And part of the work being done, we're going to offer a gift and some sage here, tobacco, on behalf of BYRC and PCRS, and want to thank him for the work that he does here and the relationship he has here with our youth and our staff. And I want to make sure I have everything. I haven't forgotten anything here. I'm looking forward to this day. There you go, Bruce. Thank you.
Sige na mahana. Wilulayam ko na kikon sa net. Whoops, nis lishien. Lakibu. Other than that, I'm also known as Bruce Robinson. I always introduce myself in my traditional way. It's important that we do that so that gives us understanding of who we truly are and where we're from. And it's a wonderful day today. I'd like to have a special guest here today, Karen. And I'd just like to sing an honor song to honor all our ancestors. Doesn't matter where you come from here on Mother Earth, we should always honor our ancestors because it's that understanding of who we are and where we come from. So in essence, when we honor our ancestors, we honor ourselves too. So it's in that understanding of that. Because, where it comes from here, within. So I'd just like for you to all stand. As I sing my song, you pray in your heart in your own way for the things you're looking for yourself or for others. Great Spirit, grandmothers, grandfathers, so grateful for today. So grateful for bringing us together in a good way, with a good open heart and good open mind. I ask that you bless everyone here, bless everyone here. Bless their families, bless their families. So grateful for BYRC and all the good work that they're doing. I ask that you bless all the workers. Bless all the youth that come through these doors. Bless them, keep them strong, guide them well in the things they need to do for themselves. So grateful for the people of these lands and the ancestors of these lands. So grateful for all our ancestors. Without them we would not be here today. So grateful for our beautiful and loving Mother Earth. Mother Earth, please forgive us for anything we've done to harm you in any way, Mother Earth. Please forgive us. And be kind and gentle to us when you bring back balance in this area, Mother Earth. Be kind and gentle to us. We love you and honor you, Mother Earth, for the sustenance of life. We honor you, Mother Earth, for all our lives. So grateful for your guidance and your wisdom and your knowledge that they share openly with us every single day of our lives. Guide us well in the things we need to do for each other. Guide us well and guide us well for the things we need to do for ourselves. Thank you. All our relations.
Thank you, Bruce. Also, I just forgot to mention, my name is Patricia Supier. I work at BYRC as the Aboriginal support worker. And I just also want to remind everyone here today that your presence is really important, that we're all witnesses today in taking part in this special, I say special moment because, you know, we're so busy in our lives, and to gather together is a really special moment. So we're all here as witnesses today in taking in the knowledge, and we'll be taking that back to our workplaces, our families, and what you learned today or what you witnessed today. So thank you for your presence. And so from here, we're going to invite Ingrid up here.
Thank you. I think everyone knows me. I'm Ingrid Castens. I'm the CEO of Pacific Community Resources Society, of which the Broadway Youth Centre is one of our sites. I was going to say one of our services, but many of our services out of the Broadway Youth Centre here, of which we are so proud. Welcome everyone to Pacific Community Resources Society, and thank you Bruce and Patricia. And like Bruce and Patricia, I also want to acknowledge that we are on Coast Salish territory, the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Stolo, for which I am so grateful. I was born here. This is my place. I have no other place. I thought this was normal. I mean, not having no other place. I thought this place was normal until I became old enough to be actually quite well traveled. And this place is not normal. It is so much more beautiful than many other beautiful places on Earth, and it is so much more abundant than many other places on Earth. And I am filled with gratitude, really literally every day, to be able to live here. And I'm grateful for the people who looked after this land really millenniums before us and did such a stunning job. And you know, one of the things you learn when you travel is there are other places that have no trees left, and it looks like it's their normal, but they once had trees, like the Mediterranean and Ireland, and they're people looked after our trees, and people looked after we have bears. Bears are emblems of cities and countries in Europe, and they haven't had bears for hundreds of years. So I'm just so grateful for those who looked after this place, and I'm so grateful to be able to stand together to look after this place into the future. So I just wanted to say that. But today's not about me. My job is to introduce our speaker, and we actually just learned that Grand Chief Dr. Robert Joseph was called away to a family emergency in Alert Bay and has sent his daughter, Karen Joseph. So you're going to have to excuse me while I look at my notes, because I just got these notes.
I just got mine too.
I need three hands, right? Mic, notes, glasses. All right. So Karen Joseph, thank you for being here on No Notice to You. Karen co-founded Reconciliation Canada in 2012, and since then she's championed hundreds of gatherings with a diversity of leaders to advance individual, organizational, and societal reconciliation. Karen was recognized by BC Business Magazine, one of the top BC women of influence, and was recently awarded, this is again where I need three hands, Canada's Meritorious Service Medal to recognize her contributions to Canada's reconciliation movement. So I'm not going to take more time talking. You're not here to listen to me. I'm going to pass it over to Karen. Karen, thank you for being here, especially on No Notice, and welcome.
Thank you.
So one of the other important pieces we're going to take care of before we hand the floor over to Karen is I'm inviting Chuck and our young person here, Jermaine, and I'm going to hand over to Chuck.
Hi, welcome. My name is Charles Lafferty. I go by Chuck. I'm from the Dene people up in the north. And I just wanted to introduce one of our young people. He is a student here at one of our schools. And his name is Jermaine Hagan, and he is from the Gitxsan and the Cree Nation.
We would like to thank you on behalf of BYC and PCRS, and we would like to give you a gift.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's
good. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right. You're on. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much.
It's an honor. Do you want the mic? You're
I got
good.
this.
Awesome.
Kayla Kasla, nas namoyu nuko kunwatagilis. Greetings to all of you who are one with me. My name is Karen Joseph. I'm the eldest daughter of Chief Dr. Robert Joseph. I really want to acknowledge our elder for calling in the ancestors and for preparing the grounds for us to do this work today. You know, a lot of what we're going to be talking about today has to do with our ancestors and where we came from and why we do the things we do and why does society exist the way it is today. And I'm so grateful to have the young people here because you're the reason we do this. My father always says, from his grandmother, they say it in Kwakwala, but essentially it means, I am nothing without you. All of our cultures, all of our traditions are focused on our children. Everything that we do is to create a better place for them. And so the work that you do is sacred. That you have that responsibility for guiding our children forward, for providing them with some safety and some security and some hope, more than anything. I'm so moved to be here today because of the work that you do. I don't oftentimes get to speak with people who are actually working with our children. So if I get a little emotional, that's why. My father gets to do this kind of stuff, and I get to work with the kind of corporate end of things. And so having the blessing of being here today is really important to me, and having started in the way that we did is really important to me. So I thank you in particular for making sure that this work happens. And I know that that's not always an easy thing to do for any of us to get this many people together for this much time in one space, right? So I really acknowledge you for all that you've done as well. So I've been asked to do a few things with you today. And one of them is to kind of talk about the history of Indian residential schools in Canada. And the next one is to kind of talk about the intergenerational impacts of that. So why are we in this situation that we are in today? And then finally, the last part is, what are we going to do about that? Where are we going to go from here? And I'll likely spend a little bit more time on the history and impacts today. Mostly because I think knowing better and doing better are two different things, right? We all know we ought not eat too much, we ought not smoke too much, we ought not drink too much, but actually doing that is something different. I remember talking to a friend of mine who's a psychologist, and she said, if knowing better was good enough, I'd be out of a job. So it takes us a long time to build our habits, and it takes us a long time to change our habits. And the way we interact with people and the way that we exist in society is determined by where we came from. I'll give you a really silly example because it sort of makes a complicated concept really simple. Which way is the right way for the toilet paper to go on the hanger? There is a right way and there is a wrong way, depending on which family you came from, right? And that's where we come from, and that's our background. That's what we bring to the table. Does it mean we're right? Some people would say yes, some people would say no. When you're in the moment, you are, right? But we have to sort of step back a little bit and go, okay, why do I think this? Why is this so important to me? And I remember when I was younger, I'm quite OCD. And so if I go to somebody's house and it was the wrong way on there, flip it around and put it on the right way for them, right? And so how many times do we do that in the work that we do? This is the right way to do things. And how many times is that actually to the benefit of the people that we're here to serve? So that's part of what I want you to be thinking about in the back of your minds as we're going through this. How do we indigenize an organization? How do we actually create room that's appropriate for us, getting us to a place of equity? So I was going to use a PowerPoint, but I know this stuff, so I'll just sort of wing it a little bit. How many of you are aware of the Indian residential school history? Okay, so most of you are. How many of you feel pretty confident that you have some competence in that area? Cool, cool, good. Thank you for being honest about that. My father is a survivor of the Indian residential school. He went for over 10 years of his life, as is my mother. The things that happened there were horrific. The Indian residential schools were established in the 1800s. The last one closed in 1996. How many of you graduated? Well, maybe we won't go there. Maybe we won't go there. The women are like, nope. That means you would have gone there. It means I would have gone there. And so what we're talking about today, everybody likes to think, oh, that's in the past. Right? It's not. I'm gonna cheat a little bit, otherwise I can really go off topic. More for your time than for anything. So there was 150,000 Indigenous children that went through those schools. The one thing that we think about, you see my father, you see survivors of Indian residential schools. How old was a survivor? When this happened? 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. They're old now, but this is actually an atrocity that was committed against our children. So for 130 years, generation after generation, our children were brought into these schools. The mandate of those schools, not made up, Sir John A. Macdonald, was to kill the Indian in the child, so that by slow degree, we're able to educate generation after generation until the nature of the animal almost is changed by the nature of the surroundings. The Indian Act defined the status of Indians as non-persons. We were savage and uncivilized and as close to nature as possible. And so we needed the government to take over our land and our resources and our all of our affairs, because we were incompetent of handling those things. There's lots of conversations that go on today about, oh, people didn't really know how bad it was, and they were just trying to do a good deed and trying to educate these children. Well, there is a fellow called Dr. Peter Bryce, who was the chief medical officer for the Department of Indian Affairs at the time, who released a groundbreaking report in 1907. Remember the date, it's really important, 1907. 50% of the children who passed through these schools did not live to benefit from the education that they had received within. 50%. How would you feel? You sent your kid in the school in the morning, and only one of them came back. If you had 2 children, half of them didn't come back. In 1920, so they released the report, knowing that our children were dying in these schools and that they weren't actually learning anything. Sir Duncan Campbell Scott, who was the deputy superintendent of the Department of Indian Affairs, said, "I want to get rid of the Indian problem until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and there is no Indian question and no Indian department." So he passed a law that made it mandatory for every Indigenous child in the country to be forcibly removed and put into these schools, knowing that only half of them would live. As I mentioned to you, those children were taken as young as 4 years old. There's lots of people that like to say, oh, it's kind of like boarding school, right? Not so much. Every survivor will tell you one thing. What's your number? People don't know this very well. As soon as the child was put into school, they were stripped of their name and they were given a number. And that's how they were referred to for the rest of their years in that school, was through their number. The reason these schools were set up was to cut off the children from the heathen influences of their parents, families, and communities. This was a very, very intentional policy to completely isolate and disconnect children from family, to break apart our families. As I mentioned, there's this idea when they first started that you can come and pick up your child in the summertime and take them home. So there's a nice little loophole to this. What's your child's name? I'm so-and-so, I'm here to pick up my child, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, ma'am, there's no child here by that name. Because remember, your child's got a number now. Regardless of whether they're there. Okay, I'm here to pick up my child come Christmas break. I'm sorry, ma'am, there's nobody here by that name. And so those children were confined to those schools most of the time for 12 months of the year, for up to 15 years. Any presents that were sent from the family were withheld until the children left. Any letters that were sent to the family were withheld until the children left. Remember, they wanted to be completely cut off from any influence of any person who was of Indigenous ancestry, because they did not want those beliefs and those values to be passed on. They locked children in cages. We've heard about the kind of starvation experiments that were done on those children while they were in there. You kind of have to remember the time. Indigenous families had a much more level social structure. And so the colonizers at the time said to Indigenous men, you don't handle your women well. They talk too much and your children are running around. You need to learn how to manage your woman. And so we're going to teach you corporal punishment. This is how you manage your family. That was a very specific idea for men to have to learn how to beat their children and their wives to keep them in line. Women, you talk too much. You think you know more than you should know. So you need to be quiet and you need to learn to clean the house and to manage your children better. So that's what they did. That was the intention of those schools, was to enculturate those Indigenous people. And so they did that. There were profound places of physical and sexual violence. As a matter of fact, if you know anything about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the independent assessment process, there was a common experience payment. So everybody who could prove that they went to residential school got sort of a lump sum of money for every year that they were in there. And every person of those people that met that first barrier that could then meet the second barrier were eligible for what's called an independent assessment process. So they estimated that of those survivors, only 30% of them would qualify for the second tier, which was you must have suffered a lifelong injury that impacted your ability to function. And you had to be able to prove it through medical records. So they estimated that would be around 30%, and they did all their numbers, they set up the staff, they did everything. Well, it turns out that of the people who even applied for that, remember, not every survivor applied, over 80% of them qualified for that lifelong injury. My father wears hearing aids. He was hit so hard in the head when he was a kid, they busted both of his eardrums. He was left bleeding for days and they didn't treat it. So actually that independent assessment process is just winding up now. There was burning, scalding, beatings until unconscious and or inflicting permanent injury, electrical shock, force feeding of their own vomit when sick, exposure to freezing temperatures outside, starvation as a punishment, intentional contamination with diseased blankets, public strip and genitalia searches, public beatings of naked children, sexual assaults, forced abortion of staff-impregnated girls. These are the ones that survived. So I'm going to ask you something. Imagine an animal. There was no language, no physical contact. If you went in there with a brother or a sister, you were automatically pulled aside. You couldn't speak. The minute you spoke your language, you were smacked upside the head or other things, put in cages, outside to freeze with no food, you know. So I want you to think about what kind of, because I always try to translate this more for Canadian society. If you had a puppy, and for 15 years you beat that puppy, you put them outside, you starved them, any kind of physical touch that puppy had experienced for 15 years was violence. Sexually, physically, whatever you wanted, emotionally, mentally. What kind of dog do you think would come out of that? How do you think? So that's what these children were. Then they graduated. 15, you had to go, right? Or 18, you're allowed out of these places. So you walk out of there, you've got 18 years of this. What kind of parent do you think you're going to be? By that time, most of the elders had already died. Your family had died by the time you were in there. Any of your other siblings, you probably don't even know them anymore. You've got nowhere to go. So what do you want to do? We are a people who need connection. I'm going to have a family. So remember that toilet paper thing? You do what you know. You'll always hear survivors of Indian residential school say, I remember when. My grandparents, I remember being on the res, I remember all of these beautiful things. An intergenerational survivor, those children of those survivors, don't have a I remember when. The terror started from the time you were born until the time you could get the hell out of there. So we don't hear those things. So how does that impact us today? Think about, you know this, any well-being indicator, anything, longevity, rape, drug addiction, socioeconomics, anything, any indicator in this country, where will you find Indigenous people on those scales? Every single time, we're either the worst or the worst. Most suicides, less likely to graduate. I mean, you're trying to live these things every single day. You're just trying to survive. And it's omnipotent. The level of sexual abuse in our communities is outrageous. And there isn't a single, not one in this country, service for survivors of sexual abuse. There's one little not-for-profit that was started up by an Indigenous woman called Little Warriors. So that's the little place that when you're sending your money, that's where I put my money. And so how successful do you think you're going to be in life with those realities? And the interesting thing is, our children don't know any more than you do. There are more children in care today, 3 times more, than at the height of the Indian residential school. We're not getting better. We're getting worse. And those children know nothing about their history. All they know is, I experienced racism. My parents left me. This happened, this happened, this happened, and they're pissed off. Life sucks. This is unfair. I got no, what the hell am I supposed to do? Pardon my language, but having been there, that's what you're thinking, right? And you guys are there to try to catch all this. And they don't even know this history. All they know is, because I'm here, this is what happens to us. And they don't know the story of how amazing they are to even be able to live today, to be able to get up, to be able to show up, to be able to try in spite of all of the things that happen to us on a daily basis. And so, what are the values of Canadian society? Justice, equality, peace. That's the way we see ourselves, and that's the way the world sees us. What happened? How many people were outraged at apartheid in South Africa? Outraged. Apartheid in South Africa is based on the Indian Act in Canada. The South African government came to Canada and said, you guys did such a good job with the Indian people. We want to replicate that there. Status cards, we still use them. They have their cards there. Shanty towns, that's the reserve system there. And the interesting thing was we were non-persons, remember? So every other person had a right to go to a judge and say, this is wrong. Indigenous people were not allowed to do that. You would be put in jail if you tried to hire somebody to help you. And they started trying to help themselves. So then they started saying, you can't gather together anymore, because they were riling one another up to try to get their children back. They couldn't get jobs, they couldn't work, you couldn't own property, you couldn't do anything. Apartheid in South Africa is identical. What's the fundamental difference between those two? What they didn't do in South Africa was the Indian residential school system. That's why, that's a pretty good reason as to why it failed. Because those children everywhere, in all of the other atrocities, still had some family that they could get some strength, some hope, some resilience from, except for Indigenous children. So you said you know about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. How many Truth and Reconciliation Commissions across the world involved the violation of the human rights of children? 4, 5, 6. Does anybody know? 1. Canada's. Peace, justice, equality, diversity. Does anybody know how many Truth and Reconciliation Commissions across the world were court mandated? Canada's. Canada did not institute this Truth and Reconciliation Commission out of the goodness of their heart. They lost the largest class action lawsuit in the history of this country. And the people that won that lawsuit, those survivors, my heroes. They said, this needs to be told for our children. Our children need to know this history. And so they took that money and they gave it to the Canadian government to implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They paid for that with the money that they won in their class action lawsuit. So that Canadians would know, so that this story would never die. And it's outrageous that Canadians never knew this. We know all about all of the atrocities everywhere else. We stand up proud. When the Truth and Reconciliation Commission first started, there were no Canadians involved in that. The very first couple of gatherings, remember there were 7 national gatherings? There was almost no Indigenous people there, or no non-Indigenous people there. And so when they came to Vancouver, my dad was one of those people that started this process all across the country. He said to me, Karen, Canadians care. And I was like, not my experience. Not my experience. I'm an Indigenous woman. Not my experience. My aunt, who's the same age as me, is one of the murdered and missing Indigenous women at the Robert Picton pig farm. We called the police, told them that she was last seen getting into a van with Robert Picton to go to the pig farm. Five years later, they did nothing. You know how the whole investigation started with that? A non-Indigenous, a Caucasian physician who had adopted an Indigenous child, her child went missing. Within 48 hours, they had a task force 5 years later. That whole thing was blown wide open in no time. And our experience as people, as Indigenous people, are not unique to Indigenous people in this country. And so my father said, thank you. He said, Karen, Canadians care. And I said, okay. And he had envisioned this walk for reconciliation. Because he said, we just have to hold our hand out. We have to say, we want you to join us on this journey. And so one day, while we were talking about all of this, during all of this, he got bowel cancer, actually. And he's a strong man. He'd never been in the hospital before, really. And just as we were leaving the hospital, he was like, oh, after his bowel surgery. And I said, what happened? He goes, I don't know, I just felt something really painful. And the nurse came in and go, oh, you're fine, just go home. 4 days later, we brought him back in. He was septic. He had actually perforated his bowel his bowel had perforated. But because he'd experienced so much pain, and as Indigenous people were like, you can pretty much kill us and we'll still be, like this. And so we thought he wasn't going to live one night. And he said to me, Karen, I want you and your friends to make sure, no matter what happens, that walk goes on. So I was like, what was I going to say? No. So we said, okay. And we started working. And there was a survey that was done by Environics Canada through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had commissioned that survey that indicated that 2/3 of Canadians saw themselves having a role to play in reconciliation, even though they had nothing to do with the Indian residential school. 2/3 of Canadians saw themselves having a role. Didn't have a clue what. Those that did know were like, oh, I don't want to really step on there. It's not really my place. I could do some things, but I don't want to mess things up again because, our best selves kind of got us here. So what do? Everybody's sort of holding back. And so my dad said, we've got to do this our way. Because Indigenous people, okay, I'll tell you another story. I have a friend who's Jewish, and we were in this leadership program together. And both of us have our traumas. Her brother was actually a reporter that was killed when they found out he was Jewish. He was publicly beheaded on national television. And so we talked about the intergenerational trauma of being Indigenous and the intergenerational trauma of being Jewish and the resilience factors that we had built up as a result of that. So Jewish people, because they don't have necessarily a land base, that's part of their whole history, have to be self-sufficient, and their insularness and their economic stability allows them to transplant wherever they go, right? That's their resilience factor. We as Indigenous people are never going anywhere. We're here, we're not going anywhere. This is where our ancestors are, we're not going anywhere. And so we face this every single day. I remember back in the day, everybody say, oh man, the one indicator that we have that's a good thing, we have like the highest teenage pregnancy rates, right? Which means we're the fastest growing population in this country right now. And I remember somebody saying to me, oh, we got to do something about those teenage pregnancy rates. And I'm like, oh, heck no. That's the one thing we got going for us. Like, we're still going to be here. Because we lose somebody so often. How many people in this room who are non-Indigenous, I'm going to put this out there, who don't have an Indigenous background, have been to 5 or more funerals in your lifetime? How many have been to 20 or more funerals in your lifetime? That's the average number of funerals we go. Yeah. See, I said if you're non-Indigenous. We go to about 20 a year, easy, minimum. So our kids understand death from a really young age. And so what does that do to us? When you lose somebody, what does that do to you? You kind of hold the ones closer to you a little closer, right? You kind of recognize, you know what? None of us are perfect. I could hold this grudge with you forever, but I just love you. And you need to know that because you're trying to keep them alive long enough to get to a better place, right? So that's what we're good at. We're good at saying, you matter to me. I'm here for you. I love you. And you're a part of my family. We're good at that. So we're good at holding circles because we have so many funerals, we always hold a circle, right? That's our resilience. So I was talking to my friend who's Jewish. I said, hey, wouldn't that be cool if we taught you how to build relationships like really super fast and keep them close, no matter where you are, and you taught us how to manage our money? We'd be so much stronger, right? And then you start thinking about strength-based leadership. You start thinking about diverse teams. So, there's this one thing about Indigenous, but you guys are from the coast, so you'll understand this. We're not all hoop dancers, right? We're not all hoop dancers. We all don't wear big feather bonnets. I'm a traditional Indigenous woman. Can't speak the language. Does that mean I'm not Indigenous? I'm a traditional Indigenous woman. Can't sing for a lick. You do not want me to sing. My daughter, who loves me to death, is like, no, Mama. I'm an introvert, can't dance. I do it because I have to, but it's like, compared to the beauty of some other dancers, I can't dance. I'm the eldest daughter of a hereditary chief. I am his grandest gift, because I'm going to have the kids that are going to carry the name. I'm gay. I'm going to marry another chief. We're going to have babies, and they're going to, well, I blew that one. Does that mean I'm not an Indigenous woman? A traditional Indigenous woman? What I'm really good at, if you have ever seen our events, you got 1,000 people coming to visit you for 3 or 4 days, you feed them, you house them, you put on these grand displays of beauty and everything else. I'm the one in the back goes, you there, stop, your head's, okay, now you can go. I'm that person. Told you, a little OCD, right? How many blankets? How much food? Where did we get that from? Okay, that's my job. Don't make me dance. Don't make me sing. Don't make me cook. I can't sew. I can't do any of those things. But I could get everybody organized, and they listen to me because I got that anti-look. We all have our own skills, right? And as people, as cultures, we have our own skills. And so what if we started weaving those things together? Every one of us is doing our very best to make a difference in this country, to make a difference in our communities, to make a difference for our people, to make a difference. And we're not getting where we want to be because we haven't been working together. We haven't recognized that diversity isn't a nice thing to have, it's a must. If we knew how to do this, it'd be done already. Because we certainly got the will to make it happen. We certainly got the work ethic to make it happen. But we haven't been able to. The thing we haven't tried is weaving all of those things together. Instead of saying, it was your ancestors who did this to me. Or, you guys are lazy. Or, get a job. Whatever. So those are the things. So when we started doing these dialogue workshops, that's what we called them, because we didn't want to call them traditional circles, because that meant we could go on for years and years and years and never ever stop having a circle. So we called them dialogue workshops. And we based them on some values. Namuyu. Every single race, I don't care where you come from, has a value. And if you go back to your historic roots, Celtic, Scottish, whatever, Namuyu, we are all family. We are all one. Doesn't mean we're all the same, we're all family. How many families are all the same, right? You're the same as your sister? But, so we all have different skill sets, right? Namuyu, that's the number one thing. We're all family. We're in this together. We're all responsible for this. Number 2, openness. Social change. Has anybody ever heard about social change? No? Just a few people? What's sort of the first tenet of social change? I want to change the world. What happens? What happens when you get into this work? You change. The only way you're effective is if you change. Because people can see that. They can see right through you if you're not authentic. If you show up, I'm guaranteeing you, if you're trying to work with teenagers and you show up and you're inauthentic, you're done. You are going to have no impact whatsoever. So you got to work on the inside. You got to start believing. You got to start dispelling those little lies that we all tell ourselves of, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, I'm not smart enough, I don't know anything. Who cares? We love one another. And if you can get to the place where you start loving yourselves and we start loving one another and we start recognizing that no matter where we come from, our children. Remember what I said in the beginning? I am nothing without you. All of us, no matter where we come from, want something better for our children. And so we get up every day and we keep doing. We get up every day and we have little wins. We get up every day and we start working together and we make a difference. So when my dad said this, he says, remember, I'm still the, I don't know what you're talking about. So we started doing this, and I started seeing people come and bring their gifts. Reconciliation Canada, we had no money, we had no plan. I can't, you run an organization, not-for-profit society. Nothing about finances, all that kind of stuff. I can strategize pretty good, I can vision, but I can't do all of those things that you need to do, right? So we did this. So I asked a friend of mine, I said, well, this is reconciliation. I got to find somebody who's total opposite of me so that we can actually manage this together. Like we're living what we're talking about. So she's this Caucasian woman from Ontario who's a certified accountant, blonde hair, green eyes, fit like no tomorrow, like does all kinds of weird things on the weekend. Like comes in with scratches and broken things because she's been doing some, I don't know, thing you're not supposed to do with your body when you pass a certain age. Like we're totally different. But she had the skills that I needed to do what I needed to do, and I had what she needed in order to make a difference. And so we had 8 months. And my dad, has any of you guys ever seen my father? So we're getting all these people coming and interview us, and I'm like, okay, Dad, we'll talk about this walk, and we're gonna get max 30,000 people, but don't say that out loud, okay? Because if we don't get there, we're gonna get judged for that, right? So what does my dad do? First thing he does, he goes on TV, we're gonna have 50,000 people. I'm like, Dad, it took 10 years for the Vancouver Sun Run to get 50,000 people to come out. 10 years. Like, we got 8 months, no money, no plan, We'll do it. We had 50,000 people because of Namuyut. We're in this together. This is a Canadian issue. Everybody cares. It was the first, if you were there for that first walk, that was a life-changing experience. Like, life-changing experience. And the places that we learned the most from was from our youth. Multicultural youth, multi-faith youth, coming together with Indigenous youth. They understand. They get it. It's everyday reality for them. How do you live in this world? My parents speak this language, I speak this language. Am I this? Am I that? I was born here, but they were born there, and we practice this religion, but you have that religion. They totally get, like, the dichotomies, all of the complexity of who we are, right? Some of the most amazing work that we've ever done has been with youth, and some of our most amazing answers has come out of there. So there was an extra value that they said we needed to put in there. Courage. Courage. Reconciliation takes courage. Because we gotta be real. You gotta, listening to these kind of stories, because our story is not unique. Reconciliation isn't about mine's the worst story. It's about, as a result of this, I built these strengths, and I'm willing to share them with you so that we can do better together. So that's kind of, I'm gonna stop there because after a while I get tired of listening to my own voice. And maybe we can take a quick break and just ponder a little bit. If you have any questions, and then we'll go into the kind of the next stage of what do we do with all this, right? And if anybody has any questions, there is no we always say this, any question is valid, right? Any question is valid. We are never going to learn unless we ask the question. Courage, remember? Courage, number one, courage.
I have some information up here. There's Chuck has a printout of some good references and some websites to go to, so pick one up on your way out. And then we have the Moose Hide campaign. I have picked up a few of these from, where was I? Anyhow, I have a few here, so have a look. You might know about it already. And then I have this booklet here called Witness. It's from the UBC. As you may know, there's a recent opening of a residential school, like an educational place at UBC. So I picked up a few of these. And they're just doing a soft opening right now. They'll be fully open in September. So I have a few of those there. Okay, so we're going to spend the rest of the next questions time. Yeah.
Yep.
So I will, any questions, put your hand up and I'll bring the mic over to you so we can have it recorded. Who would like to go first? Or anyone's eager?
Do we have to volunteer people?
Maybe. There we go.
Thank you. How do those of us who are non-Indigenous working with Indigenous children or youth best support them?
For me, it's about recognizing resilience and finding out what they're good at. I think something that was really, really life-changing for me personally on my own journey, and I didn't tell you that because, yeah, just not there today, but is this idea, and this is not true for all Indigenous people, but I'll tell you a little bit about myself. When you grow up in a society like this, you're sort of less than, and you believe you're less than, and people look at you and treat you like you're less than. And so the hardest thing to come to grips with is to recognize that that's not true. To recognize that I am a gift of creation, and that creation lives in me, and life sort of puts layers upon us that for some reason makes us shut down. It's true for anybody, no matter where you come from, those little lies you tell yourself, right? But they're louder for Indigenous kids. And so you need to acknowledge that regularly. And I don't know if you guys have the capability of it, but to do like some strength-based testing to figure out what people are good at, and because we spend so much time as Indigenous people thinking that we're not good at anything, that we actually don't spend time figuring out what we are good at. And our young people are so gifted. And I think voice is a big one. Voice is a really, really big one. And asking them to speak their truth and not getting offended by what comes out. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other hands up, or is this a good time to?
So you got it all? We're good to go? Anything you guys want to know about? Anything you want to?
Yes.
Well, it's not my question, and I'm not going to out the person, but it was a question that came up on the break, and so if I could
Sure.
do this. So someone from the group was asking about what more we could do in our work, and I actually thought that would be the perfect segue for our reconciliation committee to talk a little bit about what they're doing and what more people can do, because it came up on the break. So without outing anyone.
Actually, I'm just, if I could just sort of speak to some of the stuff
Yeah.
that we do, that would be awesome.
Yeah,
so
and,
both,
and then
yeah.
and then internally we have a,
Yeah.
a reconciliation working group, a
Mm-hmm.
committee, and I think that would be really great. So
Yeah. So some of the things that we sort of work on as an organization is, remember, social change comes within, right? So start having these conversations with your family. Reconciliation really started for us as a family when my mother left. So this was sort of back in the day. A life, we had gone through all of the hell that you go through being Indigenous. I mean, any stereotype that you can think of, we lived. And my mom left. And so here's my father, this logger, fisherman, small community, back in the day, all of a sudden with 5 teenage kids. This is how ill-prepared we were. Does anybody know what a Fiat, like the little Fiats are? The 2-seaters, you know, window stops here. That was our car. 5 teenage kids with this man. So he comes home never talked, was never there. He spent 6 months of the year away. We didn't know him and he didn't really know us. And we're all like dying because, you know, she literally, we came home from school one day, the closets were cleaned out. We didn't hear from her for months. It was like, just, we were done, you know. And so we're all sitting there at the table having dinner, oatmeal. It's a dude, right? Like, and he says to us, I know you're all hurting. I'm hurting too. And I don't know what to do. But the one thing I know we have to do is talk about it. And so nobody's allowed to leave this table unless you tell me how you're really doing. And we did that every day for months. So first and foremost, we all have conversations that we need to have with our families. Have those conversations, those hard conversations. Because that's where the practice comes in. That's where you're going to learn to be authentic with our kids. So that's one thing. The other thing that we do as an organization, so my dad always says the worst thing that could happen when you leave here today, what's the worst thing that could happen? Does anybody know? You do nothing, right? Well, that was nice, okay. I'm out of here. But, so have those conversations. Have them with your peer group if you want. What are your misconceptions? What are the things you don't believe in, or you believe in that you really don't want people to talk about? And how do you overcome those? Because if you have those conversations, then you engage in some accountability, right? So that's one thing. So we actually have here's my personal reconciliation plan. I'm going to do these 3 things. Don't make them huge. 3 things that you're going to do on a regular basis. The other thing that we have is we have what's called a kitchen table dialogue series, so that you can actually invite your friends or your peer groups together and talk about this. You are now the experts. You now actually have more information than probably 99% of Canadians about this history. You are now the experts. The elder talked about witnessing. The responsibility of the witness is to carry the story. That's your responsibility, is to carry this story. So that's another thing. So those kitchen table dialogues, you can actually download them from our websites. The other thing is, how do you recognize excellence experience? So board members. How many board members are Indigenous? What are your HR policies if you want to attract more Indigenous people? So we're a organization. We're a not-for-profit organization. We believe in mentoring. And so we hire people who we know this stuff because we live this stuff. And then we train them up to take up the leadership positions. We actually started the organization through what we're calling knowledge philanthropy. So I was never a CEO of anything before this. I was a contractor. I know strategy. I know all kinds of other things. But I worked by myself. I never had anybody that reported to me, never knew anything about anything really. And they trained me. So they put me together with some people, and that person was my friend that I was telling you about, that kind of trained me up to be who I am today. And then, so you've got to recognize those, like you, for instance, right? You have some skill, you have some knowledge, and you're able to carry yourself well, which is the hardest thing for our people, is to find our voices. And so, what training is happening there to actually take leadership position? What is it I heard? 70% of the people you serve are Indigenous? Is that true, roughly? Yeah. So I don't see 70% Indigenous people in this room as leaders, as staff, right? So those are some aspirational goals. I know it's not easy to do, but those are aspirational goals. So how do you build that skill set? Because our kids are going to start recognizing when their voices are represented. So that's important. So that's at the board level, that's at the senior executive team level, that's at every single level of your organization. That is probably one of the number one things. And in order to do that, you have to recognize things like bereavement leave. Remember how many funerals we have a year? How do we do that and still get paid and still have a job? How do we recognize that there are ceremonies? Those of us that are able to do this in a sustainable way oftentimes are in ceremony. How do we acknowledge that as an HR policy, right? How do we start recognizing through equivalent compensation for different skill sets? If you're 70% or whatever serving Indigenous kids, the person who is Indigenous likely has more of a skill set, maybe not fiduciarily recognized, than the non-Indigenous person. How do you balance that out? So UVic, for instance, now has elders that come in that are paid at the equivalency of a professor, a tenured professor, because they're the experts. They hold the knowledge, as opposed to, oh, I'll give you $50 or $100 or $200 for your time. So those are some real challenges, like fundamental systemic challenges that you have to start asking yourselves and start figuring out, how do we actually create those changes? So the really cool thing about this was the thing. So part of the training that I got was about systems change, social change, systemic change, all that kind of design theory and blah, blah, blah. So they sent me to work with Peter Senge. Does anybody know Peter Senge? He's like the guru of systems change. Otto Sharma, Peter Senge, all these like people that charge $100,000 a day to come and talk to you for one day. And I was like, okay, I'm spending 3 years with this guy, and I'm going. Finally, I just said to him, I said, I don't understand why this is, I mean, I know it's supposed to be harder. I must be missing something, because this is kind of how we do things as Indigenous people. This is like how we do things. And it's about design-centered, people's human-centered designs that recognize our connections to everybody, that Namwayut, what I do impacts you, what you do impacts me. It's about strength-based theory. It's about all of these things. I'm like, well, that's like the big house. And he goes, yeah. That's actually where we got all of this from, was studying Indigenous cultures around the world and how they set up their structures. You want to know a systems change expert? Talk to an Indigenous person that knows about their culture. And then give them the technology, the English words that you would use to do that. It's how we live. So starting to recognize those kinds of things, which is why I said for you, this would be an easy transition, right? I don't know her. Just so you know, I don't know her. I only met her for a little while. If you don't take her, we will. But that's how you do it, like getting those people together and teaching them things and recognize that they have something to teach you, right? We always think, oh, reconciliation is about us helping those Indians get, well, you know what? We actually have the answer to this. We know systems change. We know social change. How do you think we got 50,000 people out in 8 months? We know how to build relationships. We know how to work together. We have to. That's how we survived all of this time. We might not know the technical skills around it, but we know how to do it. So start like layering up those kids, you know? I saw some young people here that I'd be like, you want an internship? Come on, let's find some money. You know, you want to do this? Let's do this. Because just from the few people that I've seen running around in here, because you guys are doing good work, they're able to look me in the eye. Do you know how hard that is for an Indigenous kid? Like, they can look me in the eye and they can smile and they have some confidence. You guys have everything you need here to make some change, like to layer those kids up to be really serious leaders, because we know how to orate, we know how to lead. Can't write for a lick, most of us. Some of us are really good writers, but recognize what those strengths are and build teams around them. So yeah, that's, I mean, I think as an organization, you guys are so ready to, I see people everywhere here. So, and I haven't ever seen that before. So that's it. Now, I wanted to make sure that you heard that, because you guys are doing really good work, and it's hard work, and keep doing it, and make room for the people that are here. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any last questions here before we close? Okay. You don't. Okay.
I was just wondering if you could, I might have missed it because I stepped out for a minute, but if you could recommend, I was just talking about my daughter, she's in grade 5, so grade 4, grade 5, social studies are a lot different than what you've told us here.
Yep.
So I'm wondering
yeah, no, we don't want to go there. Age appropriate. Right? Yeah.
well,
Yep.
well, no, but I was wondering if you could recommend some age appropriate, like, I don't know, resources.
There's actually a whole bunch of curriculum. If you look online, Legacy of Hope has a whole bunch of stuff. They basically created curriculum all the way through all of this. There's some really amazing books that are coming out right now. There's also a young man, if you go to our website, I can't remember his name. He's a Jewish fellow. He's like 10 years old when he started with us. He did this whole project on the history of Indigenous people and the correlation between that and the Jewish experience. Like, these kids know.
Yeah, well, I mean, she
Yeah.
knows because I tell her
Yep.
what I know
Yep.
for the most part,
But they're geniuses.
yeah, but I think communicating with her teachers, they were like, oh no, this is what we do. Because I recommended some things and I said, well, what about this? Or try, this is important too. And they're just like, well, this is the book.
Okay, so some of the things that we do as an organization, and most people have the skill to do it, you could do it as well, is speak to schools. So we've done that. And it's really relevant in Vancouver in particular because of the multiculturalism. It's so I could just tell you, because our team is completely multicultural as well, and so just the language, when you first come here, Indians sound really privileged. I got a status card, and if you don't know English very well, it sounds really cool. Oh, they reserved land for you. Like, there's some really interesting language things, right? And it's like, oh, Indians got the best deal in the world. You get free housing. You don't pay taxes. All of this stuff. And so, but look at that young man online, and she could volunteer for some of our stuff. Like, you'd have to come with her, but but yeah, because. We could help teach her how to do that for her own school.
I think it's important.
Yeah, it's about change. Those young kids are just, Like, I couldn't get over it. Look at that young fella's, you know, he'll know. Because I don't care what color you are. I mean, I keep talking about like different, every single one of us comes to a point in our life where, boom, man, I don't know that what my parents told me is actually like right. What are my values? I know everybody in my family's been a doctor, but I really want to be a dancer. How do you know? I got into accounting and I hate numbers, you know? And so everybody has come to that place where they're challenging their internal self and figuring out who you actually want to be when you grow up. And some of us take much longer than others to figure that out. But that's reconciliation. And those young people understand that when they're getting bullied, or they start recognizing differences in size, differences in your eye shape, your hair, you know, and it's a perfect age. Perfect age. Yeah, I was really surprised. They don't use the same words, obviously, but they totally get it. Yeah.
So I have one more question, and then we'll close from there. We have.
Hi, my name is Tracy Joseph. I'm
Hey,
a
my name's
family.
Karen Joseph.
Yeah, somebody already asked me if I'm related to
Yep.
I'm a family support worker in East Vancouver with Vancouver Native Health, and I guess that does raise a question, like, whose responsibility is it? Because I know when we had the Youth Matters forum, that was a big thing brought up too, about the VSB doing the reconciliation within the schools. Now, I know with my daughter's school, you know, like, they have Aboriginal actual teachers, so they're able to implement that, basically scratch out what was given to them and do their own what they want. So it's really, I know, their responsibility to take it on themselves, but we're at the higher level where they can like how come they're not taking that on to like switch the curriculum and stuff like that?
At the level of the Vancouver School Board?
Yeah.
There is an actual, kind of like what you guys have, a reconciliation committee, but there's an Indigenous committee at the Vancouver School Board. And what you could do, or you and some of your friends, could actually go to that school board, write them, you can go to their meeting and say, you know, we need more of this. So one of the opportunities that we have, we've got 5 teachers here who can easily implement this in one school. What if we gave this teacher there, and actually had them as resources going to all of these other schools who don't have this, right? Or teaching people here. I mean, you don't have to be a teacher to teach about this stuff. If you're Indigenous and you grew up anywhere near our communities, this is, I mean, we can talk all day about this. So start recognizing that you actually have some authority here, that you are the authority, and offer that to people, you know. So, yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay. On that note, I'll just do that now. So just a quick announcement about talking about.
You're going to come and join us?
Huh?
You're going to come and join us? Wait, where's my card? I'm just teasing.
Yeah, so on that note, we're going to, just want to quickly announce that the Reconciliation Committee, PCRS Reconciliation Committee, is welcoming new members. So if you have an interest or want to know more information, Chuck, Ingrid, I'm having a little Debbie, and I'm just having a blank out moment here for a second to help. Thank you for help. Debbie, Chris, myself, Bruce are all on that committee, so please join us. We will be making an announcement in July as our next meeting, so we'll put a wide out invitation for that, and there's some great work happening there, lots of teachings, and yeah, we just want to hear more from you. And once, you know, this is all about engagement. It's all about, you know, we're in this together. And the dialogue is, I really enjoy that dialogue because we have so much to share learn and share from each other. So please join us. Look out for the next meeting in July. So on that note, we're going to do our closing. Can somebody just tell me what time it is quickly? I don't have it. 11:30. Good timing. Okay, so I'm going to invite Bruce up here, and he's going to share a few words, and we'll close with a song. And I think just want to thank everyone for coming here today, and once again to acknowledge the territory that we're on, the Coast Salish territory, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Coast Salish, and all the Stalo and our ancestors and present families. And that we're in this together, all my relations.
I'd just like to thank you for all really being patient and listening to stories. Because these are true stories, right? It's that understanding, right, and what she's brought out here today. Right? And, we always talk about reconciliation, right? See, that's what you're all here for, is to be able to make that difference especially for our younger ones, because that's important, right? And a lot of times when I sit down with the younger one, I always ask them, a lot of times they don't know where, but I always ask them who you are and where you're from. It makes a big difference, and that. And I had another young man when I was going to, they call it decolonizing suicide prevention. Right, and that he was an outreach worker, and he was Caucasian, right, because we were talking about this, right, residential school and everything like this, and right, and we're talking about the Europeans and everything, and he felt like we were really attacking him, but that's not what it was about. Right, it's that understanding of that, right, the presenter, he started asking, for some, what were their thoughts, because there was probably about 20 of us in there, and maybe 15 were Indigenous, right? But what I said to him was, it's that understanding. Doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. If you can take somebody and lift them up and get them walking again in a good way, doesn't matter who you are, because you're coming from here. Mm-hmm. You're coming from here. That's the most important thing. Doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. It's that realization of it, that the person that you're talking to is a person, is a human being. And what was brought out here is to give you understanding of that person and where it all comes from. Because when I go out and give some teachings, I say, none of us, doesn't matter where you come from on Mother Earth, none of us ever gets away from intergenerational effect, because that's understanding. A lot of us say, I'll never be like my dad. I'll never be like my mom. And you and behold, what happens? We wake up one day and we go, Yeah, I'm my dad. I'm my mom. But you see, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's in what you learn. As you heard, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds. That's when they started teaching. Right? That's when they started teaching our younger ones. That's why it was so effective. Right? But I'd just like to thank you again. Thank you, Karen, for your teachings. Because this is important, right? It just gives understanding of who and where we come from in life. Right? That's the most important thing. That's how we're able to help. Because I come, right, listening to her and her stories and all the stories that were brought out, it gives me flashbacks. It reminds me. Right? But it's that understanding that, that's how I'm able to help, from understanding. That's where it comes from. And that's why these teachings are important. It gives you understanding. Right.
Before you do the song, I'm just going to do one more. Thank you, Bruce, for sharing your words. And yes, just a reminder that we listen, but also our hearts listened and we feel. So just pay attention to how you're feeling today or where you're at today, and just, connect is really important. And we're all professionals here, and just to support each other, because honestly, we don't do this work alone. We work together. That's how, we have to work together to carry on with our work here. And I just want to ask Bruce, I always like to ask Elder, is any unfinished work here, anything I need to finish here before we close?
That's good, because, if you do feel something, right, share it with everybody. That's important, right? Share it. Don't hold it in, right? Because it's important that you're okay, right? Because, when we lose somebody, especially the younger ones that we're working with, right? I always say that, we have to be okay for ourselves, because for the rest of the youth that we're working with, right? And it's important to be able to bring it out in a good way, right? So you can continue on doing the good work that you are doing. Because there's more youth that will walk through these doors. Doesn't matter which department you're from, right? And we all have to be okay with it. And just to continue on in life, to be able to pick somebody up and continue on, especially picking yourselves up. Because if you weren't affected by it, then, right, then there's something wrong here. But seeing all of the effects that it does have on all of you, right? It's in knowing that you guys truly care, truly care, right? So, and that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here, because I know the good work that everybody's doing, and continue it. And don't hold it in. Bring it out. Share it. So,
Also just want to give thanks to Ingrid and Debbie for your support and helping to coordinate this, and thankful that the work is being done today, and Chris for organizing all the audio and the RSVPs and all that work, and thank you for the food that's been brought to us today from Jenny and Paul Nattrell from Bannock Factory. Look him up, he's awesome. He has a food truck in North Van. And just thank everyone here. We all did work today. And we have one more gift for you, Karen. On behalf of Starbucks, we got a nice basket. So please
It's good, thank you.
enjoy as Starbucks. Starbucks Coffee today has donated their coffee today. All right, so thank you. Can I give you a hug?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's going to sing a healing song. Like I always say, you always just pray in your own heart, in your own way. As I sing the song.
Put your feet on the floor. Or you could stand, whatever you want to do.
so grateful for the teachings that was brought out here today to give us understanding, to help us all move forward in life in a good way. Oh, great spirits, grandmothers, grandfathers. I ask that you bless everyone here, bless them. Hold them within your heart, hold them within your heart so they can continue on in life in a good way. Let them share these great teachings, let them share these great teachings in a good way. I ask that you be with Robert Joseph and his family, and Karen Joseph and his family. Keep them strong in the work that they need to do. Keep them strong. Keep them strong. Guide them well. Guide them well. Guide them well. Thank you. Thank you.
Also, just one more witnessing to acknowledge. I just want to acknowledge Manny. Where's Manny? Manny, I want to acknowledge Manny and thank her for the time you spent to bring the gift of protocol for Karen and her family today. So thank you for that. That's a really important piece there. My heart is really touched. Thank you. And one more acknowledgement to Chuck. Just want to say thank you, Chuck, for also bringing in the importance of our youth and Ingrid and acknowledging that. So thank you. All my relations. Thank you. Everyone have a good day, rest of your day. Safe travels.